I wanted to talk about the issue of Charles Manson, a case which of course gets a great deal of attention, mostly negative attention, and which people hollowly echo the same tired mantras about over and over again without actually understanding the case. This is going to be a two-part video. The first part, I'm simply going to explore reasons why the trial was a farce. The second video I will create probably immediately after this one will deal with the true motives and reasons behind how the case played out exactly as it did. Now, first, credit where credit is due, although a lot of this information I knew long ago and simply haven't put in video form. A great deal of new information has been brought to my attention by the new updated version of the Manson file, of course by Nicholas Schreck, and many credits to him for being the only person with the intelligence and accuracy necessary to actually bring these things to light in a cohesive, well-written manner, as opposed to the pulp fiction which typically is generated by this case. So all credit to Nicholas for that one. So let's go through the actual court proceeding of the Manson case, which should, as we will find out, be called the Watson case more than the Manson case, and go through a few reasons why the case itself was a farce. I'm going to leave the conspiracy theories out of it. I'm going to leave the mind control mumbo-jumbo out of it, and just focus on the actual justice itself rooted in the case. The first problem with this case is this. When Charles Manson was arrested and first put on trial, they stripped him of his ability to make phone calls. They severely limited his ability to contact the outside world. Now, of course, he had the Rolling Stones interview and so forth. But his access to his lawyer, his friends, his supporters, various lines to the outside were all but cut. Now, while this isn't blatantly unlawful, it is unusual in that in the vast majority of cases, if you're on trial for a crime, you have access to the outside world. Number one, to keep you sane while you go through the emotional toll of a trial to begin with. Number two, so that you can gather the information and the organization necessary to actually wage your case. With Manson, such was not the case. He was given limited access to the library in the prison, the albeit very limited library, very limited access to that library for less than an hour a day. That's unfair. When Manson first, and this is a new revelation, which most people won't believe, but you can look it up yourself. When Manson was first incarcerated, he hadn't yet been declared guilty, when he was first incarcerated pending trial, he was given a psychological examination because the judge in the case noted that Manson's behavior at times was erratic. Now, of course, anyone's behavior when they're potentially going to the gas chamber is going to be erratic, but the judge thought it was evidence of some mental disease. He was checked out by a psychiatrist, and lo and behold, this psychiatrist points out Manson's smart, he's quick, but he's certainly not mentally ill, and he's indeed competent to act as his own lawyer. Manson's ability to act as his own lawyer was denied him in the case because he made a suggestion that the DA should spend time in a jail cell to level the playing field, so to speak, and that's a quote directly from Manson file, so again, credit where credit is due, to level the playing field in order to make the case more fair. Now, was this an absurdist tactic which made no sense? Of course it was. That was probably Manson's point in making that actual claim, that the DA should spend time in jail during the trial to level the playing field. It's unreasonable. Everyone knew it was. It was probably his idea of an amusing joke. But his pro per was stripped away. He wasn't allowed to represent himself in court, despite testimony to the judge from the psychiatrist that Manson was not only above average intelligence by far, but number two, was perfectly psychologically balanced and a reasonable individual and could, in fact, adequately represent himself. He was, reading through the law books, he understood everything fairly well. See, while Manson is fairly illiterate, he's not dumb. he probably could have gone on to great things had he decided to actually stay in school and study. He wasn't given that ability because he was in prison at a young age. But his ability to represent himself was unduly stripped away by a judge who thought he was crazy, even though he wasn't actually acting crazy. Now, it's been pointed out before. People will tell me this. They'll say, well, Manson was acting crazy in court. No, he actually wasn't. It wasn't until it was clear to Manson, much later in the trial, that he wasn't getting a fair trial that he began to act out in court. All the charades that you see footage of or reenacted in the movie Helter Skelter, or any of those things, those happened after his ability to represent himself was stripped away and he was given a completely incompetent lawyer who was ineffective and didn't know what he was doing. Now, the greatest piece of evidence of all, in the absolutely unfair nature of this case. Now, I don't care what you think about Manson, whether you think he's a lunatic or whatever, and I will prove in the next video that he's not a lunatic, and I will tell you the real reasons for the case. Even if you consider him, unrightfully, a lunatic, he still has the right to a fair trial by an impartial jury with the ability to represent himself and or be represented in a cohesive manner according to the laws and customs of the judiciary system of the United States of America. That's a right that is guaranteed to every citizen in this country. It doesn't matter if they're evil or hated or a Satanist or a brainwashing hippie. They are still given the right to a fair trial. And I will explain to you in very simple terms. There is no way in heaven or hell Charles Manson could have received a fair trial. And here's why. He couldn't have received an impartial jury. Let's go through the singular, important reason why this would have been impossible. President Richard Nixon came out in the national news while the trial was being conducted, when the jury hadn't even been selected yet, came out in the national news and declared Manson was guilty. In any other criminal case in human history, or I should say in the history of the U.S. judiciary system, in any other case of an organized, cohesive judiciary system, which actually operates on the idea that a person is innocent until proven guilty, this would have been enough to declare a mistrial. It would have been one thing if Richard Nixon had come out and said he was guilty after there was already a jury and they were already cloistered away and didn't have access to the news. He put it out in the national papers and it was all over the radio and the television for months that Manson was declared guilty by Richard Nixon. Ask yourself this. Is it likely that 12 randomly chosen individuals from an urban area such as Los Angeles don't have access to television, radio, or newsprint? Is it likely that the 12 people that they found had not already seen Nixon declare Manson as guilty? Now, people will ask me, why do you care about Manson? He's going to die in jail anyway. I care about the fairness of the judiciary system. Now, we all know that the judicial system in this country is a farce, and that more often than not, people are crucified by the media, and they're put in prison for things that they didn't do, or they're kept out of prison for things, even though they have done terrible things, because they've got wealthy people on their side, or they, one of their friends is a media mogul. We already know this to be the case. For instance, when Ford pardoned Nixon after he was impeached and resigned. Oh, well, lo and behold, the public doesn't have to know the truth now because the president just pardoned the former president. We all know, and this is an old Vermont proverb, or at least it's billed as a Vermont proverb. I'm from Vermont, by the way. That the judicial system is like a spider's web. The little flies are caught and the wasps go free. And that's exactly how it worked in the Manson case. Charles Manson was not given any of the basic respect of the judiciary system that any other citizen in the United States would be accustomed to getting were they to go through the same thing. The fact is that the media sensationalism of the murders was driven by Hollywood in part because, of course, and as I will explain in the second video, they had a hand in the killings to begin with. which also people won't believe. When you say that anyone's involved other than Manson the lunatic controlling other people with LSD, and or Satanism, when you say that that's not true, they say that you're somehow controlled yourself by Manson. It's a very convenient system. Anyone who challenges the conventional notion of Manson as this mass-murdering, brainwashing, LSD and Satanism hippie immediately gets blamed, and they say, well, they must be a Nazi, because, of course, that Manson was a racist, which he wasn't. And if you listen to decades and decades of quotes by Manson, you won't find even one racist quote in there. You will find quotes attacking white culture, though, for corrupting the black culture. Isn't that interesting? What an interesting racist. He was kicked out of the Aryan Brotherhood, by the way, for not being racist enough. So he doesn't even get along with racists. But Charles Manson has been used and misused in every possible way by the mass media to make money, to make interesting cover stories about all this, satanic panic nonsense. Well, Geraldo Rivera in the 80s, great example. Have you ever seen Geraldo Rivera, the shows he did in the 80s? The most sensational, out there bullshit you will ever see in your life. There are a handful of people who think that he has a working brain cell. Now, I don't dislike Geraldo on a personal level. He'd probably be a fun person to talk to. But he's absolutely ludicrously insane when it comes to sensationalizing everything he comes into contact with. Anyone who's ever watched him report on a minor crime knows this. With the Satanic Panic special that he did back in the 80s, Charles Manson's a Satanist, and Ted Bundy's a Satanist, and all of these individuals, they must have links with devil worship. Lo and behold, none of them actually did. You want to know what Charles Manson's religious approach is? I can't tell you. Because you wouldn't understand it. Because it's certainly not Satanism, it's certainly not Scientology, as some people have suggested. It has nothing to do with paganism. It has nothing to do with any labeled religious group or movement on the face of the earth. It's his own. He's taken this strange hillbilly notion that God exists outside of the church, and he's applied it to his own life. He's not a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or any other group. So saying that and I would point out, and here's something else that's important for people to know, and I can't say this enough, it seems, because people keep parroting this same stupid line back to me. It is not physically possible to control people using LSD or any other mind-altering substance. Certainly not psychedelic drugs. They can't be used to control people's minds. Datura is occasionally found in some voodoo mixes, but we have no evidence or any reason to believe that Datura was heavily used at the ranch. Although there is an interesting story that Tex Watson apparently got a hold of either that or Nightshade, I can't remember, and was wandering around Los Angeles saying beep, beep, beep. That's also from the Manson file, and I thought it was hilarious. Essentially, Charles Manson was denied his rights during the trial. He was denied every right that a person should have when they're on trial, when they haven't yet been declared guilty. But people didn't care about that, and when Manson tried to complain, of course, he was probably beaten up in the jail cells by the guards and or the prisoners, because, of course, there are plenty of black gangsters there who were hearing from the media, lo and behold, this massive race war instigator is sharing our cells. Well, what are we going to do? Beat him up. The public's perception of Charles Manson as this lunatic mind, which only thinks of evil and destruction, is probably the furthest thing from the truth that it could possibly ingest. I have not personally spoken with Manson, but I've spoken with dozens and dozens of people who have. Not one allusion to a race war in the course of any of their conversations. Never talked about helter-skelter. Never talked about, oh, I'm going to order children to go kill other people. Manson has reacted with bemusement towards individuals who claim that they're going to kill in his name. Absolute bewilderment that people would be willing to do such a thing, because Manson has actually never killed anybody. And that's the other thing, of course, the Manson myth has gone from he controlled others into killing, and now it's gone to the point where most people even believe he actually physically carried out the killings himself. I've had people try to tell me he cut the unborn baby from Sharon Tate's belly. He wasn't even there. Sharon Tate was already dead. Now, of course, and here's something that Manson file also suggests that, well, actually, I'll go into that into the next video. That's more the topic for the next video. Never mind. It's too dense for one video. There's just too much truth. When it's covered up by a facade of lies this thick, it takes a little explaining to wash it off. It's like shampooing once when you haven't, washed your hair in 10 years. It's just not going to cut it. You're going to need a few extra rinses in your cycle to get through. Essentially, look for part 2. It'll be uploaded either right after this video or tomorrow. And I will explain the real motives behind the case. And I hope not to plagiarize Manson file in any of it. I'll give credit again where credit is due. I think it's important that the truth get out there more, though, because some people, for whatever reason, they don't want to read, or they don't know how to read, because in this age of, iPads and computers and so forth, many people don't own any books, which is regrettable, but they need to know the truth too. So a little bit about the Manson case. Look for part 2. Peace out.